Speaking of the guy.
No, yes, we're all good. Memoria has it. I don't know if she's done it yet, but we'll make sure.
Yeah, I saw it pop up on my calendar. You're quick. Not only are you good, you're quick.
If I don't, so, you know, I'm one of those guys. If I don't do it right away, I don't want to lose it.
They cleaned it up.
Down here,
At some point, I'm going to need a gavel somewhere, you know, not today, but
the closer we get to the end of session, the more
that's
everything's urgent.
That's the scariest part. So.
Mr. Chairman, we just want to get like maybe one or two more senators here before we get going. Think there's any senators out in the hallway? Anybody out there? Tell them to come in. We need them. Because we need a quorum. We have a quorum, sort of. Maybe not. We got 5. I think we need one more to have a quorum. Okay.
I would say that they're at other bill hearings.
Okay, we have a quorum. Here we go. Okay, welcome, Chair Hoover, and you've got the Public Service Commission team here. And I know you've handed out a report on co-location, observations, recommendations for the benefit of the committee today. And that report was in SB1, and you did what you needed to do. So I want to thank you for bringing. Why don't you, for everybody online and here, tell us. I know everybody here, but tell everybody who you have with you at the witness table, okay? Or you could introduce yourself, or Mr. Chair, you could introduce them. Your call.
Okay, so I'm Fred Hoover. I'm the chair of the Maryland Public Service Commission, and with me is Commissioner Bonnie Sushman, Commissioner Mike Richard, and then we have 2 commission advisors, Ben Baker and Maura Schreem. The commission advisors aid the commission in its decision-making process, and they have been integral parts of the report that we put together. As the chairman mentioned, as a result of the passage of SB1 last session, the Public Service Commission was asked to examine the issue of potential co-location of large energy users with generation facilities. And we filed the report that you requested in December of last year, and we've distributed a fairly detailed set of slides sort of highlighting matters that are in the report. I don't intend on going through the slides, except I do want to bring your attention to slide 4, just so we kind of know what we're talking about here. And when we're talking about co-location of large energy users, there's 2 scenarios that we've discussed in the report. One that's referred to as Type A, which is essentially the process that is used by any large company that wants to hook up to the electric system. There's a process where they apply for that at the local distribution company, and then once they're brought into the local distribution company, it's then reported up to PJM, which is the grid that oversees the supply of electricity in Maryland and the surrounding states. This is the traditional method of incorporating large customers of energy that is factored into PJM system when they do their analysis and studies of how much electricity is going to be needed, which leads to eventually how much power generation is on the system and how it gets connected. The Type B situation that we're referring to, and which we discussed in the report, is this potential situation where a large customer would have a direct contractual relationship with an existing power generation source, so that the electricity generated by that plant or facility would be solely dedicated to providing for the energy needs of that particular customer, and they would be separated from the grid. In that sense, what would happen is there would actually be a barrier so that the customer couldn't actually take service from the grid. But on the other hand, the generation facility would no longer be providing electricity to the grid. And so we were asked to opine as to what the impact of this type of situation, which has been talked about as a potential way to hook up data centers in the state of Maryland, what impact that would have on reliability, prices, and energy resources in the state of Maryland. And the upshot is that our conclusion is that this arrangement does have the potential to have negative impacts on both resource adequacy for the grid and consequent impacts on cost for the other customers. Because the problem is not only are you adding new demand to the system, but you're essentially subtracting something that had been contributing to the overall power supplies needs for the state and for the region and dedicating it to this particular facility. And the concern we have is that there actually is a lot of economic incentive for this type of arrangement to be made if in fact it's permitted. Because under the current system, the plants that make electricity, whether they make it through fossil fuels or renewable energy or whatever, they offer their products to PJM. PJM decides how much electricity is going to be needed to supply the electricity needs based on weather, historic demand, and things like that. And then they put out a solicitation for offers of power. And so under the current system, the people that own power plants say, I can sell you this much electricity for this price. And if PJM finds that offer to be acceptable, they accept that bid. Under this situation, the power generator would now have an exclusive contract to supply electricity to this one facility. And as I mentioned, the concern we have is that not only is the demand increasing, and the demand has been going up for a variety of reasons across the grid, but now you're actually subtracting something from the supply. So it's essentially, in our mind, a kind of a lose-lose situation for the overall grid. And so we are concerned that this type of co-location, which is what is referred to, is actually detrimental to the overall resource adequacy needs for the state, and consequently could have an impact on the rates that customers pay, because not only would this contractual arrangement subtract a source of electricity from the grid, the payments that are made by all the customers to facilitate the development and maintenance of the overall grid are not going to be paid by this entity because, again, they have this exclusive contract. And at a state level, the various charges that are imposed by the local distribution company to fund things like Empower, energy assistance, all the other things that the state has decided that ratepayers contribute to, they also wouldn't be paying for that. So it's our recommendation that there be changes made in the Public Utilities article to make explicit that this type of arrangement is considered to be a retail customer, which will give us the ability to allocate costs to them as we would with any other customer that becomes a customer of the utilities and the grid, and then also change some of the definitions when it comes to what's considered to be a supplier. It's going to be your decision as to whether or not you allow this Type B co-location process to exist at all. We're not making a specific recommendation on that, other than to say that we are, seriously concerned about the impacts of this arrangement being permitted, but we are trying to make some other recommendations related to the aspects of the Public Utilities article, and I think what the decision that you have to make is that, the data centers may become a fairly integral part of the state's digital economy. And they may become an important part of the economic infrastructure of the state. And the data centers, provide a certain amount of benefits, jobs to a certain degree, and obviously tax revenue. but they also have a fairly significant impact on the existing infrastructure, both of the energy system and apparently of the water system. And so I think it's going to be incumbent on the elected leadership to figure out how we fit in this new economic entity, the data center, so that it doesn't cause harm to the energy infrastructure and the existing customers of utilities, but still facilitates, economic development going forward. So in the appendix of our report, we actually have specific recommendations for legislative ideas, and we're obviously here to work with the committee should you want to go forward on any of those approaches. But with that, I think I'll end my formal remarks because I'm sure there's lots and lots of questions, and we'll be here to respond to anything you have.
The rest of the panel just here to respond?
Yeah, I have them here mainly
Okay.
to help.
Well, again, tell everybody who you have at the table again.
Yeah, so sitting to my right is Commissioner Bonnie Sushman, to my left, Commissioner Mike Richard, and at the far end of the table, Maura Schreem and Ben Baker.
You also have Sophie McDonald.
Yeah, Sophie McDonald, who is actually a person that was provided to us via the Department of Energy, who was actually one of the authors of the report. So we're
Got to give a shout out then to Ms. McDonald.
She's in the audience.
Glad you're here. And we are missing former delegate, my friend in District 17, colleague and constituent Kumar Barve, who's also commissioner, but who's homesick.
He would have been here today, but he's actually feeling under the weather. So, but he
And Commissioner
very much wanted to be here.
For the record, Commissioner Suchman's my constituent.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Well, look, this is a hot topic. It's a big topic. For those of you, this is a bit of the truncated version. Now, on the 18th of December, we have a much thicker document with an appendices, and if you haven't read that, there's a lot in there, including, as the chair said, some recommendations and such. So why don't we, I would love to get some Q&A going here from the group, and we're going to start with Senator Watson.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming out. So we're talking about the co-location, we're talking specifically about Calvert Cliffs, right?
Well, that's the hypothetical that's been sort of talked about. The idea would be that a large user, a data center, for purposes of the hypothetical, would make a contractual arrangement with Calvert Cliffs to buy the electricity that Calvert Cliffs produces, or at least a portion of the electricity that Calvert Cliffs produces, in order to supply the energy needs of that data center.
No, I got you. It seems like, and I think I got the argument, is that they're going to be taking energy that currently is used for a large variety of folks, and they get the exclusivity, right? So my question is simple, and I'm thinking 3 Mile Island in the back, right? That was decommissioned 2019. Microsoft is purchasing it and taking all the power. But nobody's talking about that because this is new generation, because it's been decommissioned so long. Is there any way for Calvert Cliffs to increase their generation to mitigate the impact that you're talking about?
Well, the only way they could increase their generation is to actually add another unit. There's like 2 units that are located there. And, there's been some discussion, I think it's more kind of aspirational, about the potential of locating on that site things that are referred to as small modular nuclear reactors. So theoretically, if something like that was constructed and placed at the Calvert Cliffs site, then they could increase their generation. Otherwise, the generation that they create from the 2 existing units is already used by PJM.
Yeah, no, I got it. I just want to see what the capacity, the max capacity of Calvert Cliffs could be if we raised it, and would that help, allay some of your concerns about using up power that the community should really be relying on?
It could. And I think one of the things that we talk about in the report is that there is, and I did a briefing across the street earlier. What we described was there is a potential. But again, this would be part of the process of development of data centers, is either a requirement, an incentive, or something to sort of encourage the data centers to contribute to the power situation. So what I described to it across the street was require them to bring their own lunch, essentially. And so, and some of the proposals that I've seen around the country for data centers has talked about the fact that they're going to increase the use of renewables because they're going to co-locate the data center facility with a large solar field or other things like that. So, I mean, the potential's there for them to do that. And I guess the primary example of that is the situation you mentioned earlier related to 3 Mile Island, a facility that had not been generating electricity at all, but now is going to be generating electricity in response to this situation. So I'm not saying this couldn't be a problem, but our concern is that unless there are either requirements or incentives dealing with how the situation is done, this one type B proposal that we talk about in the report has more negative consequences than positive ones.
Well, and if I can add, if you take the commission out of the equation, so you've got a data center that comes in and co-locates with a facility and is of the type B, then we lose the ability to encourage those data centers to be a part of the solution. And so, for example, in Arizona, there's a data center that has negotiated with Arizona Public Service to provide grid support. So at times that the facility goes offline or something is going on with the grid, the data center actually will provide support to the grid and be paid for that. And so there's a perfect example of a win-win. So you have a data center that's not only not causing a problem, but is actually helping to facilitate challenges to the grid. So in that situation, had the commission not been a part of the process, that wouldn't have happened. And so that's, that we can have eyes on the issues at hand and work with the parties. That gives us the ability to protect consumers on the one hand, but also allow for opportunities where the data center can actually help the situation rather than hurt the situation.
Yes, I was just going to add on to the chairman's answer, in that a lot of nuclear power plants stations are considering doing what's called an uprate, just enhancing the equipment, updating equipment, and they can actually get more electricity out of the existing nuclear power plants. So that would be something you'd probably want to engage with Constellation and find out what type of incentives, what type of conditions they would seek to encourage them to do that type of an uprate, which again would to both Commissioner Suchman and the chairman's answers would help alleviate some of the issues around if they were to take that power for an exclusive customer.
I'll just add that the committee took a site visit to Calvert Cliffs, and that subject did come up where they did indicate that somewhere between 120 megawatts or even 180 just through retrofitting what's existing, the 2 reactors. Now, the circumstances under which that would happen, the price tag, et cetera, that's a conversation that's actually ongoing now. We're going to go to Senator Hester, who, by the way, testified in front of the FERC on this very subject, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So I'm going to yield to you, Senator Hester, for questions for either the chair or anybody else on the panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Public Service Commission. Really appreciate you digging into this issue and for the technical conference that you did have. I was just wondering, we've talked kind of in hypotheticals about type A versus type B. The Independent Market Monitor did an analysis of how much it would cost Maryland ratepayers, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that for that specific instance that they wrote in about.
Sure, and we actually have specific references in the report to the analysis done by the Market Monitor. So let me actually turn to Morris. You want to?
Yes. So the Market Monitor.
Actually,
yes. Thank you for the question. So the Independent Market Monitor for PJM participated in our technical conference.
For the benefit of the committee, why don't you explain who that is and what they do?
Okay. So
and also, could you get a little closer to the mic here, because we're streaming this? And
so. PJM is the system operator that plans the transmission system and operates the markets that attract generation. And there is an independent market monitor that is hired by PJM that evaluates the markets and assures that the rules are fair. And he has access to the data that we typically don't have, and we asked him if he could take a look to see what the impacts would be of taking 1 unit of Calvert Cliffs out of the market, or taking all of Calvert Cliffs, or taking an equivalent of Calvert Cliffs out somewhere else. And basically what he concluded was that the cost impact to Maryland ratepayers would be about a 47% increase in capacity costs, and on average about a 71% increase in energy costs. It's probably his assessment that the nuclear plants are probably some of the lower cost resources. You probably wouldn't see a large load customer look for a very expensive plant, so it'd be almost cherry picking the low cost plants from the system.
Number? I mean, I think it was $323 million of extra cost on ratepayers.
Yes, so for removing 1,000 megawatts from Calvert Cliffs, it was about $332 million, and removing all of Calvert Cliffs, it was about $526 million. His range on energy was not just for Calvert Cliffs. He was looking at this more for removing 10,000 megawatts of capacity from nuclear plants across PJM. And his thought was that if nuclear is attractive because of its stability, its low cost, that would be a prime area to look at. And the range was anywhere between 20 and 115%, so between 32 and 54 billion dollars across the RTO.
Right, and it's not just cost. You're taking a different quality generator and you're removing that. So you've got base load generation, and then you're going to replace it with something that is probably of less quality. So now you don't just have a pricing issue, you have a reliability issue.
Now, he also didn't get into the actual cost of the transmission system, but the transmission system exists. It exists here today to serve ratepayers. It delivers power from Calvert Cliffs and other plants. And if the co-location was to lean on the transmission system for some reason and not pay its fair share, that would have been a concern that he had. And the cost for the transmission upgrades and transmission upgrades in the future would also fall upon ratepayers.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, commissioners, and thank you for this report. I have a couple of questions, but first, I want you to, if you could, remind us or think about how the certificate of convenience and necessity, sort of like how, I guess, generation gets built, et cetera. And so last year, we passed a bill that added data centers as critical infrastructure, right? And so could you remind us just briefly kind of what that does, what that bill did?
Well, so certificate of public convenience and necessity is sort of the license to build an energy facility or a transmission line that's provided by the Public Service Commission in conjunction with analysis by a number of state agencies as to the impact of the energy facilities. And it's kind of a two-step process. One, well, historically, it had been, a question of need for the facility. That's been somewhat taken away by the move to competitive markets for energy generation. It still sort of applies when it comes to transmission lines. But then the second thing is, where's the best location for this? And historically, when the utilities were fully integrated in the sense that they not only owned the power plants, but they also brought the electricity to your house, there was an analysis done as to the growing demand of a utility company, which was mainly based on population growth back in those days. And when the demand got to a certain level, then the utility was authorized to create a generation facility to provide for that new demand, and then the state would figure out where's the best place to put that. And so now there are exceptions to that CPCN requirement that were created by the General Assembly, one for certain size renewable projects, and then last year, when it came to the backup generation sources that are needed for certain facilities. And so the bill last year had to do with the backup generation sources for existing data centers that they need to provide power for their situation and these are data centers that are actually connected to the grid. So if the power goes out, they're out just like a homeowner, but the difference is they actually have on site some way to generate their own electricity. It can be natural gas, it can be diesel generators and other things. And so the bill allowed them to do that without having to go through the CPCN process.
Right. Okay, you buried the lead. I wanted to get to the part of not having to go through this. Okay, so again, expressing, thank you, just general concerns about the ability, of the PSC and to, this being a separate sort of entity. And so prior to that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, critical infrastructure, hospitals, et cetera, and the amount of generation that they needed or for backup, et cetera, 26, I think it was like, the number is like 26 or megawatts or something. And so data centers, I think we expanded it to like 126 or something. They can be exempted.
Right.
There's some issues about the size. So
Right.
what we've dealt with is a certain size, right?
right.
No more than
Yeah.
this 26 mega. And last year, just want to make sure I'm getting the numbers because it's been a year, we're allowing exemption for a generation or an entity that is like 5 times of the hospitals and things like that. Is the math right? And I just want to, because that is related to what I said.
I believe there's no restriction. I think there was a limit, and I think it was 75 megawatts.
Okay.
And so I believe now there is no limitation. So the limitation is that it has to be for emergencies. So you can't just run it. But there is no limitation on the size or the type of generation.
Right,
So,
okay. So I just want to establish that what we're talking about, data centers that have there's no limitation on the size, right?
But,
and the source of the
understand
generation. Okay, so everybody's agreeing to that. So my other question to the committee, or just, as we're thinking about the commissioners, I really appreciate the commissioners' comments about us wanting to be a part of the whole solution. And I was trying to think of a metaphor, and I was thinking about, I come from a big family, and there certainly have been times when the pantry was running low and things just weren't doing so well. And one of the solutions would be, everybody gets a job and everybody puts all of their money into the pot, and maybe we all don't eat a whole lot, but we all eat a little better. And this seems like the option of, well, one of the kids moves next door and orders takeout. And so it's really this kind of separation. And so I really appreciate that comment and wondered, is my metaphor or how I'm thinking about it is that historically addressing the problem of energy has been seen as a collective effort, incentivized and supported by state, local, and federal government. And now there's a scenario, okay, well, we're not going to participate in the larger collective effort. We're going to have our own. Would that be correct?
So there is, your analogy is correct in this sense, although before I get to that, I want to address the exemption issue. One thing to keep in mind about the exemption issue is that the power generation that they use for backup power, whatever it is, natural gas, solar, or diesel gensets, still has to meet the existing state environmental requirements. So whatever air quality permits are needed for whatever their facility is, they still have to get that, even if they don't get aren't required to get anything from us. They still have to get these other permits from MDE. Now, on this other situation, one of the concerns that we talked about with this Type B co-location situation is the fact that because of this direct contractual relationship that they would have with the facility, they would not necessarily be required to contribute to the maintenance and construction of the overall grid. And there's two problems in that. One, under the current system, if a data center was hooked up to a generation facility and that facility is taken off of the grid, PJM doesn't even factor that new demand into their projections of what the demand's going to be for the overall system. So we view that as a concern. And the other aspect, what you just talked about, is the fact that they're not contributing to the overall cost of maintaining the grid. And then the third thing is there's a distinct possibility that they wouldn't be required to pay for all of these other things that other utility customers pay for, USP, Empower, and things like that. And so for all those reasons, we have these serious concerns about this Type B co-location situation that we discuss in the report.
Well, and the thing is, these data centers need backup power, and that backup power is just sitting dormant. And when there are issues on the grid that could benefit from that backup power, it's not available. And that is the problem with not being connected to the grid and not being, I mean, as you mentioned, the grid is sort of like a family, and we all have responsibilities. And, some of the programs that we administer encourage customers to use power at different times of the day because you're using it peak times, and that's a strain on the grid. These data centers that are not connected to the grid don't have that same kind of commitment, and that is a loss to the grid.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner Hoover, Commissioner Suchman. Chair Hoover. Commissioner Suchman, Commissioner Richard. Yeah. Co-location, and that's the practice of having several energy generating sources at one location. And I was thinking, seemed like from a practical perspective, there would be some sort of like cost savings there because you're sharing infrastructure, say lines, substations, land, and just from the surface, it seems as though that you're going to be reducing a mitigating cost there, yeah. And I would think, too, you would get improved grid reliability because it's there. I mean, you could even have battery storage there as well, to help in that respect. So could you perhaps address that for me?
Yeah, and so, the idea of co-location in general is not necessarily a bad idea. I mean, there's been talk over the years about co-locating renewable resources with fossil resources, as a way of having, an energy facility that makes a contribution. As Commissioner Suchman talked about, there is the potential that if a data center had, and the data center industry has talked about the fact that, they think they'll be leaders in developing renewable resources because, they will potentially have a large solar field connected to their data center facility, and if that's there, then that electricity could be used at time to support the grid. What we're concerned about here is really this very sort of narrow situation where the data center has an exclusive contract to buy the electricity from an existing power generation source, probably most likely a fossil fuel power plant or a nuclear power plant, and that supply, which had been used to supply electricity to everybody in the PJM system, is now solely dedicated to providing electricity for this one facility. And for a variety of reasons that we've talked about here, we view that as a negative consequence to the customers and to the resource adequacy of the grid.
What about new?
Just add to that also.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One of my roles that the chairman has given me at the commission is to represent the state at the organization of PJM states. And so one of the areas that we're trying to work on as PJM states is really to get the type of information, get the specific information that from PJM to really understand what the impact will be from a co-location arrangement. At this point, we are asking as PJM states to provide more transparency into how they are determining what the costs are, and really kind of transparency and granularity as to what is going into these costs. So that way we can have an evaluation of if you co-locate behind the meter, you may have a situation where you're now having stranded assets as far as transmission lines that were built to serve the general public. There may be now requirement for transmission lines in other places to bring power, new generation sources. So these are the type of information that we don't feel as we're getting right now from as a organization of PJM states perspective, and we are asking, because that'll also inform, I think, some of the decisions that you'll be making here at the legislature.
Yeah, and I understand your concern about existing generation, but what about new generation?
Well, I mean, again, if they bring, more food to the party, then that's probably a positive thing. But I think what it goes to is the decisions that you're going to make regarding encouraging or discouraging the development of data centers in the state. So if the state creates incentives to encourage the data centers to have, sources of power that help supply their needs, or theoretically can contribute to the overall grid, that's probably a positive thing. On the other hand, if you create disincentives, if they don't do that, or if you decide, not to allow this type B arrangement that we've talked about in the report, then that has other consequences too. So it's not, a situation of either or. It's really the decisions that you need to make regarding what role you think data centers are going to play in the future economy of the state.
One thing, Senator, is I think this is also the really important why we define clarify what our oversight of this existing arrangement is. Whether you allow it to go forward or not, there is you could argue a hole in terms of our ability to set the rules of the road for how this kind of an arrangement could work, whether it be with existing or new. And it's not just at our level, it's also at the federal level. There's a huge fight happening at FERC over this right now, just as it's happening at the state level. But as we identify in our report and was brought to our attention is depending on how you define what is a retail load in an electric company, we might never even see this kind of arrangement in terms of us setting the rules of the road for how it would work for existing generation or for existing load or new load. So I think that's part of why I think there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of discussion on is it beneficial or not to do what you were asking, and I think and that's why we also talk about in the report this idea that maybe you want to look at it before you allow it to go forward for an existing unit or even for a new one. But even before we can do that kind of work is defining our ability to have authority over the arrangement at the distribution level.
Well, and
Last question.
And if Senator, if I could just sort of put a final point on Mr. Baker's comments. There may be situations where even a type B arrangement makes sense. I mean, you're not having to build out new transmission. You're not having to build out new distribution. It may be that for that particular generator in a constrained area, taking that generator offline and giving it to the data center may actually make sense. But we wouldn't know that unless we did the analysis, and that's why it's really important that we stay in the mix. Mm-hmm. And then we can help work with the generator and with the customers to make sure that the grid as a whole benefits and that ratepayers are not impacted.
Okay, yeah. And I guess my last one would be if I were to build a data center at Capitol Cliffs, and then I decide, no, I'm going to build one, and then I build another one and say a mile away. Will the impact be the same?
Well, it
Will the
depends
concern be the
on,
same?
again, whether or not they're connected to the network, to the grid, or whether they have an exclusive, connection with it.
exclusivity.
And I think one of the concerns is, I mean, it had been, historically, there were limits as to where data centers could locate because of their need to supply their customers, but apparently, I guess in the new situation, they can literally locate anywhere. And so therefore, the potential for them to sort of pop up next to a power plant is a very real possibility.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks, Chair.
Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just challenge something you said a little bit. When a data center comes online, that's pretty much a 24-hour operation. You can't turn it off. It doesn't run intermittently, right? So if that is the case, I'm trying to understand what is the real distinction between being located or not being co-located or not. And I'm looking at what they do in Virginia. All right, so we have Data Center Alley in Loudoun. They have 3 data centers. They operate continuously. They enter in some form of agreement and pay commercial rates with utility companies. So whether it's co-located or not, there would be some payments being made, and there would still be generation that is sucked up by the data centers that are not going to the general public. So help me understand, because we've been talking about this for 2 years now, and I'm not really seeing the real distinction.
Well, actually, the big distinction is the difference in the way electricity is regulated in Virginia and in Maryland. Maryland made the decision 25 years ago to break the connection between the people that make electricity and the people that distribute electricity. So the people that make electricity, that's an independent business. They're essentially like people that make widgets. And so the power plant owners are wholly separated from the local utility companies. That's not true in Virginia. In Virginia, Dominion makes electricity and it distributes electricity. So to the extent that a data center hooks up to electricity in Virginia, they can't do what we're talking about here because Dominion owns all the power plants. So the only way they can get power is to actually sign up as a customer of Dominion. That's not true here. Here they theoretically could, make a contract with the people that own Calvert Cliffs, Constellation, and they wouldn't have any involvement with SMECO or PEPCO, the local utilities they're in that area, because they, the wires essentially are going from Calvert Cliffs to the data center, and all the other stuff that comes with that as a normal customer of a utility doesn't apply.
The other thing is that when a data center comes to Dominion and says, we want to connect, and it's we're a 500 megawatt or 1,000, they can't just turn a switch. Dominion actually will do a study to see how the data center will impact that region. Do they have to upgrade? They probably have to upgrade some of the distribution. They may even have to upgrade some of the lower voltage transmission. For data centers that co-locate, they won't do any of the studies. They will just take the generation that's there. Then the utility will be stuck with trying to figure out, do we have enough transmission? Do we have enough distribution to bring other generation to replace what they just took? So there won't be any studies. So essentially that type B has bypassed the studies, and the utilities will still have to do those studies. They'll just have to do studies under more restrictive conditions.
Let me ask a simpler question. It looks like the 2 issues are generation and cost, right? And unless you tell me differently, the 3 data centers in Virginia are being somewhat subsidized by us here in Maryland. This is what I'm hearing. So if that's the case, and we were to put data centers here in Maryland, that tax revenue could be used for some purpose, either modernizing our grid, doing whatever needs to be done. So it seems like, what I've heard for some time now, for a couple months, is that the issue is who pays for X?
It's actually a timing issue, I think,
Okay.
more than it is a payment. I mean, at some point, the customer's going to have to pay more. But from what we're hearing from the Amazons of the world, they want to deploy data centers tomorrow. And what happens with co-location, where they have an arrangement with the generator, they can do that tomorrow. And they can't do that if they want to connect with the utility, because they're going to have to do the studies. It could take years. It could be 2 or 3 years, and the data centers want their data centers deployed right away. So I think from what we're hearing, from their perspective, they'll pay more. It's not a cost issue for them. It's a timing issue. They want to bypass all of they want to go ahead of the line, and they want to be the first out there to get their facilities deployed.
Yeah, and as we say in the report, I mean, if they connect through the type A arrangement, then, there's really no problem. I mean, they pay all the various things. They contribute costs to the network. PJM knows that they're part of the load, and they make arrangements for that. It's this other separate type B situation that we talk about in the report that we think raises concerns.
Yeah, I would just add too, it's same with the PJM process. And it's a transparency issue. This is, you could say it's almost like a deactivation when a co-location takes place, because it's power that's no longer available. But if in a deactivation, that's a very kind of transparent public process, how they go through the studies that Commissioner Suchman was talking about. However, if it's a private arrangement behind, the states don't have that opportunity to understand, what the costs are and what exactly the arrangement is. And so again, some of this might be able to be fixed at FERC. And those are some of the questions that the organization of PJM states are asking right now. How can we make sure that there's more of an analogous process along the lines of what happens when deactivation takes place?
Thank you very much.
I think the last thing to kind of take away from that is I view co-location as a tool to get a data center. It is not the only way to get a data center. We have data centers that already want to build here that don't even want to use the co-location arrangement, just like it's happening in Loudoun County, just like we're seeing it happen in Ohio. The data centers are coming regardless of co-location. It can be a tool to bring more, possibly, or in our case, one, because we have one nuke plant. Maybe the old gas-fired or coal plants might be attractive to them. There's nothing prohibiting that kind of arrangement either right now. But it's a tool that could be used. But I think ultimately, when you're trying to boil it down, is I think a lot of the arguments we're going to get into and we're going to hear about is going to be this question of fairness of when they do the co-location, there will be a price impact to the customer, whether they be in front of the meter or not. The question is it fair that they don't also share in that price impact of them co-locating because they now have isolated themselves via the contract with the generator? I think that's going to be at the crux of the policy question that we're all going to be asked to wrestle with over this period. And then to your other question about them getting the benefits of data centers versus us getting the benefit of data centers, I do think it's a little bit of an arms race here. I think everyone sees a benefit here, but in that arms race, the rules of the road for some of these things, such as co-location, are not well defined, especially at the federal level. And that's leading to, I think, a lot of the chaos that we are seeing here. So obviously some of that will be resolved there, but also setting us up with the tools to set the rules of the road for what we will find acceptable at the time that it happens will help set us up to be able to, I guess, make sure it's in the interest of the public when it does go down. So I guess that, if that helps kind of maybe solidify some of this for you. Thanks.
Before I yield back to Senator Hester Washington, just on this last point, because we keep talking about arrangements, and obviously I think from the state perspective, I think maybe just need a little more clarity about the role of FERC versus what tools do we have in the toolbox here in the Maryland General Assembly, the Maryland PSC, in terms of making sure that whatever private arrangement, you keep talking about rules of the road, but it's a little murky as to those rules, who's got the power and the authority. And so I guess I'm most interested to know what parts of those rules of the road to make sure that Maryland gets a good deal, or our folks get a good deal with whatever data set, fair share, whatever terms you want to use. What are the tools in our toolbox right here Maryland General Assembly, EEE Committee versus FERC versus PSC. And then I'll yield to Senators Hester and Washington. Yeah.
So in the report, I
Oh,
think it's
I apologize. Okay,
Appendix
I apologize.
F, we actually made specific recommendations of changes to the public utilities article that we think would give us more tools to do this. As Mr. Baker indicated, this is sort of a live topic at FERC. They have a number of proceedings where they're dealing with this. They've not issued any rulings on that. Obviously, they're the entity that regulates PJM. We don't regulate PJM. In fact, we're not even a member of any of their stakeholder committees officially. So I think it's because, this is all, there's a lot of moving parts here that there's some questions as to what ought to be done. I think one of the decisions that you can make is whether or not to allow or disallow this type B co-location situation that we're talking about. We've not opined as to whether or not you should do that, and that, I think, fits into this other consideration you need to give about what it is you want to do related to data centers, how, what sort of incentives or disincentives you want to provide to them. But there are, sort of specific tools that, if this co-location arrangement is permitted, will allow us to maybe deal with the cost allocation and some of the other issues related to the grid.
Okay. I apologize to Vice Chair Kagan. I kept looking to my left.
that's fine.
Vice Chair Kagan eagerly wants to throw some questions your way.
Eagerly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your time and your expertise, and congratulations to our fellow for your work. Senator Watson asked about generation and cost. I have 3 basic questions, and I wonder if Mr. Chair, Mr. Hoover, if you want to answer in plain English, or if there's someone there who really can, for folks watching at home who aren't experts about PJM and FERC and all that. So 3 questions: reliability, oversight, and transparency. Mr. Richard, you just mentioned transparency, but I want to do it earlier than that. So reliability, how does this affect Maryland residents? 2, for oversight, this report, this handout is not paginated, so I can't even say page number X. So if I can ask you in the future to make sure there are page numbers.
It does have pages at the top,
on this,
if I remember right.
unless it's.
If you look
So
at top
on the
right,
page that says mitigation, on that page, it talks about the General Assembly should define the degree of control the state should exercise over co-location arrangements. So I'm curious as to whether you've got coaching or sort of minimum or maximum expectations or recommendations. And then 3rd, transparency. Mr. Richard talked about transparency, but that's further down the road. This briefing, which is pretty important to educate us and anyone watching at home and all the advocates and the press that's in the room, this piece is not streaming online. And I understand you didn't want to take the committee's time to go through it, but it's not on the website. It's not available. And this is a pretty helpful document. I think it's mostly in plain English. So I wonder if you could commit to figuring out how someone watching in Gaithersburg or Rockville or anywhere around the state might be able to find access to this document. Thank you.
We will provide both the report and the slides that we did on our website, so that people that can access that can find that. And I think as part of your process, it's actually put on your website. So we will, provide all we can to make sure that people can read it. On the reliability issue, we do have this concern that this type B arrangement, this direct contractual arrangement between a data center or some other large user, it's not just data centers, other entities out there that use a lot of electricity, and an existing power source, creates reliability issues, because you're not only adding demand to the grid, but you're now subtracting an existing resource. And so, the power that's there to provide electricity to everybody, there's now a little less of it sometimes. And most days this won't be a problem, but days of the polar vortex, days of heat waves, when everything's running, it could be a problem.
Well, and it's not just power, it's power quality. And so if we're talking about Calvert Cliffs, that facility runs 24/7. It doesn't stop running if there's no sun, and it doesn't stop running if there's no wind. And so when you take that away, even when you're able to replace it, you're not going to be able to replace it with the same kind of power quality unless it's another nuclear facility or another facility that runs 24/7. And that presents a reliability issue if we don't have eyes open and find a way to adjust. We can adjust for it. It would take a lot to do that kind of adjustment. So it's not just taking away generation, it's taking away the kind of power quality generation that a nuclear facility provides to Maryland ratepayers.
Just want to add two, I guess, on the reliability front, two prongs. The main concerns are, one, because at the federal level, it is undefined how PJM will study this load. Like they make commitments. They say, here's what we're going to do. They've been doing some of that. But that process that they're going through sounds more like a one-off instead of going through the comprehensive grouping. It's not that they're not maybe doing less studies, but it's happening at a single point in time instead of doing it when they're doing the whole grouping of studies. So there's some concern there. And then this gets to the resource adequacy concern, because when PJM does their studies around this, they have claimed they will make them wait until they have the transmission solutions in place. But as it decrements capacity, there's not a similar commitment to really pay attention. Like, it's not that they're not paying attention to the capacity coming down, but it's not that they have a process to add it. They're just going to send price signals to the markets to bring more capacity online. So there's going to be this wait, or this timeline to get new capacity is going to take a while, which will have pricing implications for the ratepayer, but also just the fact that now our margin of generation in the system is now lower. So you're lowering the headroom. So that's how I kind of think about it.
Following up, Fred, I don't think you talked about your recommendations or thoughts for what you'd like coming out of the General Assembly.
I
What's
was
the
actually just going to
smallest and largest role you'd like us to play?
As I said, as one of the appendices to the report, we actually made specific recommendations of changes that we think ought to be adopted to the Public Utilities article, and it comes in sort of two places. One, the definition of what actually is a retail customer, to make sure that these potential energy users are considered that, so that the regulatory authority we have over the existing companies and their customers would extend to these folks. And then secondly, a change in the definition of who's actually a retail energy supplier, so that we have some more ability to sort of deal with the generation sources going forward. If you decide to allow this Type B co-location arrangement, those changes that we've suggested would give us more ability to help manage the process and then deal with cost allocation and other issues like that. Now, on the third issue related to transparency and PJM, I actually do want to hand it over to Mike and Morris, because the transparency has to do with issues that PJM does when they make their decisions about what electricity is needed. And the concern that we expressed in the report is that this Type B arrangement under PJM's current system, if those types of contractual situations are agreed to, then PJM doesn't count that new load as part of the process of figuring how much electricity do we need to supply everybody.
You have made that clear, yes.
I think he said that very well, and it's also the fact that if it's not available, I mean, they will not be bidding into the capacity markets. So we know at that point, just in the last auction, just the fact that they didn't count Brandon Shores, that 1,200 megawatts, that had actually a huge impact, just that 1,200 megawatts, across the entire footprint. So if we're talking about just taking out these resources from the capacity market, that's just going to compound the problem. Now, PJM has acknowledged that there are flaws in its current market design, and they're working to fix that. But still, we will need these resources, and again, if they're not available, then they won't be bidding in. And
And then with the transparency, we've heard here, this is a very live issue right now as far as setting rules at FERC and at PJM. And right now, even the collection of the organization of PJM states, where we are asking fundamental questions. Recently, we sent a request for what's being called the 4R report, basically transition in PJM, resource retirements, replacements, and risks, really just to get that information that we need so that we can engage and figure out what we need to do at the state level. And this is all going to, as we stated in the letter, to specifically start setting the rules for these types of arrangements we're talking about today. So that's why we're calling for transparency. We really don't know what's behind all these private arrangements, and we need to bring them out into the open, just as we do for deactivations and other types of changes in the generation mix.
Are you good, or can we?
Here, why don't we, I think we might need
So I just have a micro question.
Okay, very micro, because we've got Director Pinsky patiently
Yes,
back there. We've got multiple additional questions, so micro questions.
Yes. When you say "we" at the PSC, and I asked this a few years ago, who is "we"? Is there unanimity among the commissioners? For whom are you speaking?
Well, when it comes to the things that we do at
Yes.
at PJM.
Thank you. Thank you. That was quick.
So Mike Richard is an officer in this thing called OPSI, which is the Organization of PJM States, which is the regional regulatory commissions. But, we actively participate at things at FERC, and when we do those things, it represents the opinion of the four of us. There will be five of us at some point, but the four of us, so.
Yeah, I take no action in that role without consulting with my
Well,
other
and-
colleagues and the chair.
And we've spoken a lot about the lack of transparency. So what Mike is doing, and Mike is doing yeoman's work there, and he represents us, and we are fully behind him.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we're going to go Brooks, and then I think Hester still would like to ask a question, and then Washington, and then we're going to pivot to Director Pinsky after that. And
Okay,
so
I'll be-
Senator Brooks, why don't you lead off?
Thanks, Chair. I'll be short, I think. Chair Hoover and Commissioner Suchman sort of hit it on the head. You were talking about sources, and you spoke of SMR, small modular reactors, and then you came up and you were talking about the capacity factor, and you're right, that's very important. Because if you look, and that's the percent of time that particular source is generating electrons. Now, the capacity factor on nuclear at Calvert Cliffs is about 93.1%. So, so if you're going to replace that with something other than nuclear, then you're not going to get the particular generate the electrons that you want. So that is key. And I guess one could also surmise that type B would sort of be behind the meter.
That's what's referred to, yeah, right.
Behind the meter. Okay, yeah. Then they won't be sharing those costs.
Right.
Those infrastructure costs. Okay.
That's the concern. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Yep, Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on something that I heard one of the commissioners talk about, which was, the fair share that the data centers, are willing not to pay. And I thought I heard you say that the customers eventually are going to have to pay more, but for the data centers, it's not a cost issue, it's a timing issue. So, if it's not a cost issue, is it true it's not a cost issue for the data centers? And if it's not a cost issue, then can't we just make them pay 100% using the beneficiary pays principle?
Right, and they probably, they've said now that it's much more of a timing than cost issue. Ultimately, they're going to be paying. The concern I have, there's going to be an increase in cost, but there are issues other than costs. Reliability is a big concern to me, and you take a facility that runs 93% of the time, and then you replace it with capacity factors that are 20 or 30%. That's a huge impact on customers, and trying to address that within a structure like PJM, which is a giant machine, is its own challenge. So we're looking at cost, and even if the Amazons of the world are willing to take on all the additional cost, we're still going to have a reliability problem.
Okay, Senator Washington?
Thank you very much. And again, thank you all so much. This has been enlightening, and for your advocacy for the state of Maryland and all our users. I think I want to ask about the affordability, getting back to the sort of the broader picture. So excluding this discussion about data centers, I think the issues around priority and focus, right? So if we're not having the discussion of data centers. Currently, do we have enough generation to address the needs of everyone else, of our hospitals, our schools, our families? I mean, are there challenges, excluding this discussion of data centers? Are there existing challenges for the grid, for its reliability, for the ability to provide safe, affordable, accessible energy, adequate energy to Marylanders?
So sitting here today, the PJM system, the way it's designed, has enough generation facilities that make up its grid. I mean, it goes basically from the East Coast out to Chicago. It's the largest electric grid in the world. So they currently have enough power facilities to supply power that people need on an everyday basis, including those days when we have extreme weather, either extreme cold with polar vortexes or extreme heat during the summertime. And the way the process is set up, theoretically, their projections of energy demand send signals to the people that make electricity, and however you make it, with windmills, solar panels, or fossil fuels. And so those entities will see what's needed and construct the necessary facilities. That's the theory behind this, and so far it's working. The concern is that, this complete reliance on the private sector to provide the power generation, can be a little risky. And so, maybe there needs to be some more effort at looking at what the demand side is. And what I said across the street was, I think we really need to put everything on the table. So we need to look at all of the solutions, both on the demand side, what stuff should we be doing to encourage the more efficient use of electricity, taking advantage of new technologies like energy storage and other things that allow us now to sort of make electricity, store electricity, and use electricity. And then also look at all the various sources of generation to what's needed to make sure that we got, enough electricity to supply everybody's needs, including the folks with the data centers. And that's, a careful balance, and there's a lot of parties involved in it. Private sector entities like PJM, the generation companies and the utility companies, governmental entities, the commission, FERC, Congress, and this legislature. So everybody sort of needs to pull together to figure out how to make sure that the lights stay on. But I don't have a concern today that we're going to have power blackouts or anything like that. We're just concerned that, particularly with the data center situation, since they can locate virtually anywhere, and while the data center industry talks about benefits that they're going to bring, I am a little concerned that not going to be a situation where it's this race to the bottom, that people are so focused on the tax revenue they bring and the jobs they bring that they, decide to put in danger either the energy infrastructure or the water infrastructure of the state.
Yeah, so I just want to be
in support of the chairman too. I just wanted to mention that the PJM queue right now is blocked up, and there's just almost five gigawatts of energy projects that are in the queue that are just waiting for an interconnection. And throughout the PJM footprint, there's several hundred gigawatts. So there are projects that want to be built. it's up to PJM now to move and get these projects online.
And then just to follow up on the chair and Commissioner Richard, we just had a resource adequacy proceeding. So we are very mindful of this issue, and we're going to be following up with other proceedings. So we're not just sort of sitting back and waiting for people to come to us.
This was not a critical, this
Oh, no,
was
no, no,
a-
but actually, so I'm saying this for information purposes.
Yeah,
So that, so as the chair said, you know, we want to have everything on the table. We are actively looking at, I mean, we're looking at issues around affordability. And so, you know, so we're not sort of waiting for people to come to us. We're pretty active, and we're not going to be able to solve these issues if we don't solve them as a whole unit.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess what the point I wanted to make, or to reinterject, is that it's still the case that I believe that we only generate, 11%, that we are primarily importer of energy. So without data centers existing, we are transitioning without data centers to using more electricity. It's the case that electricity or energy is becoming less affordable for lots of reasons, the need, populations grow, et cetera. So this is about the comment and the observation that the needs of data centers or of a particular entity, a private entity, is taking the focus, and we're solving a problem of an entity able to build its own, you know. Not that we're not trying to address the issues of all, but I would say, Mr. Chair, that I would hope that before or concurrently that we address the issues that we have been aware of about the stability, you know, of the grid, of the affordability of Marylanders who are here, of the businesses that are here right now, the schools, the institutions that are here right now, as we are so enthusiastically seeking creative solutions for data centers. So that's I just want to bring it back to a broader issue that our focus should be on the millions and millions of Marylanders living here right now.
Were you going to say, isn't that so? And then
So
they're gonna
isn't
say
that-
yes, and then we can. Okay.
Would the commission say that's so, and that's your priority?
Sure, and again, I mean, the specific recommendations that we made in the report are things that we think can help us, you know,
Yes.
deal with this situation. And as
Yes.
Commissioner Suchman mentioned, we have ongoing proceedings looking at, you know, the issue of energy affordability particularly for low-income customers. And it's actually based on a piece of legislation that was passed a few years ago that gives us the authority to look at targeted rates for certain classes of customers, and we're in the midst of doing that. And we have a separate proceeding where we're looking at the billing collection and termination policies of utilities, particularly focused on what happens during the summertime, because excessive heat can be as dangerous to customers as the cold. So it's all part and parcel of what we're trying to do.
Okay, and speaking to resource adequacy proceeding, we were joined by Senator Augustine. I believe he testified at that proceeding. So, okay, folks, Chair Hoover and the team from PSC, thank you for coming in here. This is a topic that will be continued, okay, to be continued for sure. Okay, we have to take a 5-minute break for technical reasons and so you're back to go playing commissioner and advisor and solve all our resource adequacy crisis problems. And Director Pinsky, you can come up to the table. We have to take again a 5-minute break before we start streaming that briefing. And Paul, just come up at your leisure.